The silent cry. The red dust of Kepler 442 bits swirled in angry clouds as another barrage of plasma fire rained down from the sky. Captain Elena Vasquez pressed herself against the makeshift barrier of mining equipment and twisted metal, her breath coming in short bursts through her damaged helmet. Around her, the remaining defenders of New Harmony Colony fired back with everything they had. But their mining lasers and construction tools were no match for military-grade Vorthak weaponry. Status report. Elena shouted over the screaming of energy weapons and the rumble of approaching war machines. Sector 7 is completely overrun, Captain, came the crackling voice of Sergeant Williams through her comm unit. We've lost the eastern mining complex. Civilian evacuation to the underground shelters is 60% complete, but we're running out of time. Elena peered over the barrier, her brown eyes taking in the horrifying sight of the Vorthak ground forces advancing across the colony's main plaza. The reptilian aliens moved with military precision, their scaled armor gleaming in the light of burning buildings. Towering war mechs stomped alongside infantry units, their massive weapons reducing human structures to rubble with casual efficiency. 3 months ago, New Harmony had been a thriving mining operation, home to 12,000 colonists who had carved out a life on this harsh but resource-rich world. The Vorthak Empire had arrived without warning, claiming the planet belonged to their ancient territory. When the humans had politely disagreed and shown documentation of their legal settlement rights, the Vorthak had responded with orbital bombardment. Dr. Marcus Chen crawled up beside Elena, his scientific equipment replaced by a military-issued pulse rifle. His usually neat black hair was singed and dirty, his lab coat torn and stained. "Elena, the quantum beacon is ready," he said, his voice tight with exhaustion and fear. "If we're going to send that distress call, it has to be now. The power core won't last much longer." Elena nodded grimly. They had managed to jury-rig a long-range quantum communicator from mining equipment and the colony's research lab. It was their last hope of reaching Earth or any of the major galactic civilizations for help. The problem was that Kepler 442 bits sat in a remote sector of the galaxy, and the Vorthak had already destroyed their conventional communication array. "Send it on all frequencies," Elena ordered. "Emergency channel, diplomatic channels, even the black market networks. Someone out there has to be willing to help." Dr. Chen's fingers flew over his makeshift console. Message transmitted, broadcasting human emergency codes and our coordinates. If anyone is listening, they'll know we're in trouble. Elena allowed herself a moment of hope. The Altarian Federation was known for their peacekeeping efforts. The Zenthari Collective had trade agreements with Earth. Even the Corvan Republic, despite their isolationist tendencies, had shown sympathy for smaller species in the past. Surely someone would answer their call for help. But as the hours passed and the Vorthak tightened their siege, no response came. Light years away on the gleaming capital world of Altair Prime, Federation Admiral Kethmorin stared at the human distress signal displayed on his holographic projector. His blue-skinned features were troubled, his large eyes reflecting genuine concern for the desperate colonists. Around the conference table, other Federation officials discussed the situation in hushed tones. "The humans are requesting immediate military assistance," reported his aide, a young Altarian named Velcani. "They claim the Vorthak Empire has launched an unprovoked attack on their mining colony." Admiral Kethmorin touched a control, bringing up tactical displays of the Kepler system. "How many Vorthak ships are we looking at?" Long-range sensors detect at least 40 vessels, including 3 battle cruisers. The humans appear to have no military ships in the system, only civilian transports and mining equipment. The room fell silent. Everyone knew what those numbers meant. The Vorthak were one of the galaxy's most aggressive military powers. They had conquered dozens of worlds and shown little mercy to those who opposed them. To challenge them directly would mean war, and the Federation had spent decades building their peaceful reputation. "Send a formal diplomatic protest to the Vorthak High Command," Admiral Kethmorin decided finally. Express our concern for civilian casualties and call for negotiations. And the humans, sir. The Admiral's expression was pained. Send them our thoughts and prayers. That's all we can do without risking a galactic war. Similar scenes played out across the galaxy. The Zenthari Collective's ruling council debated for 6 hours before deciding that intervention would violate their non-interference doctrine. The Corvan Republic expressed sympathy but cited their own territorial disputes with the Vorthak as reason to avoid involvement. Smaller species that might have been willing to help lacked the military strength to make a difference. Back on Kepler 442 bits, Alina and her defenders were running out of ammunition, hope, and time. The colony's shields had failed completely, and Vorthak ground troops were advancing through the outer settlements. The underground shelters were packed with terrified civilians, including hundreds of children whose only crime had been being born human on a world the Vorthak wanted. "Captain, we're picking up something strange on long-range sensors," Dr. Chen called out, his voice cutting through the sound of nearby explosions. Multiple contacts dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. Configuration unknown. Elena felt her heart leap. Is it Earth Fleet? One of the Federation powers? Chen frowned at his readings. Negative. These ships don't match any known design in our database. The energy signatures are unusual. Definitely not human or any of the major species we have files on. Through her binoculars, Alina could see the Vorthak forces had paused their advance. Their commanders were clearly receiving reports about the new arrivals. For several tense minutes, nothing happened. Then, Chen's equipment lit up with activity. "Captain, we're receiving a transmission. It's on an encrypted military frequency, but the computer is translating it automatically." The voice came through their speakers, deep and resonant, speaking accented but clear galactic standard. "Human settlement. This is Fleet Commander Zeth Killer of the Shadowkin tribes. We have received your distress call. Prepare for immediate tactical assessment." Elena felt the blood drain from her face. Every spacer in the galaxy had heard stories about the Shadowkin. They were nomadic warriors who traveled in massive fleets, never staying in one system for long. They had no homeworld, no permanent allies, and no mercy for those they considered weak. They were raiders, pirates, and mercenaries who served no one but themselves. They were also, according to every military analysis Elena had ever read, the most dangerous fighting force in the galaxy. "Dr. Chen," she said quietly, "are we sure that message went out on emergency frequencies only?" Chen checked his logs, his face pale. "Affirmative. But Captain, the Shadowkin don't typically respond to distress calls. They're more likely to see an opportunity," Elena finished. "A weak colony under attack, ripe for looting once the Vorthak finish with us." In orbit above Kepler 442 bits, the sleek black ships of the Shadowkin fleet hung motionless against the stars. Their vessels were unlike anything else in the galaxy, organic-looking craft that seemed to shift and flow like living creatures. No running lights marked their positions, no visible weapons boards broke their smooth hulls, yet every military sensor in the system registered them as heavily armed and extremely dangerous. On the bridge of the flagship, Fleet Commander Zeth Killer stood before a holographic display, showing the tactical situation below. He was tall even by Shadowkin standards, his midnight blue skin marked with the ritual scars of a veteran warrior. His eyes, solid silver without visible pupils, studied the human positions with interest. "The prey fights well for such small numbers," observed his tactical officer, Kreshtar. "But they are clearly outmatched. The Vorthak will overwhelm them within hours." Zeth Killer nodded slowly. The Shadowkin had initially intercepted the human distress call by accident while passing through this sector of space. Standard procedure would be to ignore it and continue on their way. The Shadowkin had no treaties with humans, no obligations to help them, and no reason to risk their own warriors for strangers. But something about the transmission had caught his attention. The human commander's voice had carried no pleading, no promises of reward, no desperate bargaining. Just a simple statement of facts. They were under attack, they were outgunned, and they needed help. It was the kind of message a Shadowkin warrior might send in similar circumstances. "Show me their defensive positions," he ordered. The hologram shifted, displaying the layout of New Harmony Colony and the positions of the human defenders. Zeth Killer studied it carefully, his experienced eye taking in the tactical situation. The humans had formed a defensive perimeter around their civilian shelters, using mining equipment and construction materials to create improvised fortifications. Their positions were well chosen, taking advantage of natural terrain features and overlapping fields of fire. Elena exchanged glances with Dr. Chen and Sergeant Williams. This was not the conversation she had expected to have with the galaxy's most feared warriors. "Because those positions would leave our civilians exposed," she replied honestly. "We're not fighting to win, Commander. We're fighting to buy time for evacuation and to make the Vorthak pay for every meter of ground." There was a long pause before Zeth Killer responded. "How many of your warriors survive?" "We have approximately 200 combat-capable personnel remaining," Elena reported. "But most of us are miners and technicians, not soldiers. We have limited military training and equipment." "And you face how many enemies?" Elena's jaw tightened. "Estimated 4,000 Vorthak ground troops, plus armor and air support. We're outnumbered approximately 20 to 1. Another pause, longer this time. When Zeth Killer spoke again, there was something different in his tone. Something that might have been respect. "Human Commander, maintain your positions. Do not surrender. Do not retreat. We are coming." The transmission ended, leaving Elena staring at her comm unit in shock. Around her, the other defenders looked equally stunned. "Captain," Sergeant Williams said slowly, "did the most dangerous species in the galaxy just tell us they're coming to help?" Elena looked up at the sky, where the dark shapes of Shadowkin ships had begun to move. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to smile. "I think they just did, Sergeant. I think they just did." Warriors recognize warriors. The first sign that everything had changed came when the Vorthak orbital bombardment suddenly stopped. For 3 days straight, the reptilian invaders had maintained a steady rain of plasma fire on New Harmony Colony, but now an eerie silence settled over the battlefield. Elena pressed her eye to the scope of her rifle, scanning the Vorthak positions across the devastated plaza. "They've pulled back their forward units," she reported to her squad leaders. "Something has them spooked." Dr. Chen looked up from his sensor array, his face pale with disbelief. "Captain, I'm reading massive energy signatures in orbit. The Shadowkin ships are moving into attack formation, and the Vorthak fleet is. They're actually repositioning defensively." Elena felt a chill run down her spine. The Vorthak Empire had conquered 47 worlds in the past century. Their military doctrine was based on overwhelming force and ruthless efficiency. They didn't retreat from anyone, and they certainly didn't adopt defensive postures when facing smaller fleets. But apparently, they made exceptions for the Shadowkin. In the command center of the Vorthak flagship, Commander Vorthnax studied the tactical displays with growing unease. His reptilian features were set in a permanent scowl, his scaled hands clenched into fists as he processed the implications of what his sensors were telling him. "How many Shadowkin vessels?" he hissed to his tactical officer. 18 confirmed ships, Commander. All appear to be heavily armed. Their configuration suggests a raiding fleet, not a full war fleet, but 18 Shadowkin ships could engage our entire force and have reasonable chances of victory, Vorthnax finished grimly. Every military academy in the galaxy taught courses on Shadowkin tactics. They were the bougie men that kept fleet commanders awake at night, the variable that could not be calculated or predicted. "Orders, sir." Vorthnax considered his options. The smart military decision would be to withdraw immediately and report the Shadowkin presence to High Command. But he had already committed significant resources to taking this human colony, and the Shadowkin had not yet made any overtly hostile moves. There was still a chance this was simply a coincidence, that the nomadic warriors were passing through and would not interfere with Vorthok operations. Maintain current positions but cease orbital bombardment, he ordered. Send a diplomatic query to the Shadowkin commander. Determine their intentions. On the surface of Kepler 442 bits, Alina and her defenders watched in amazement as sleek Shadowkin dropships descended through the atmosphere like falling stars. The alien craft moved with impossible grace, their hulls seeming to ripple and flow as they navigated through the smoke and debris of the battle zone. The first dropship landed in the colony's central plaza, right in the middle of no man's land between human and Vorthok positions. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the ship's hull simply melted away, revealing the warriors inside like a flower opening its petals. Elena had seen images of Shadowkin before, but nothing had prepared her for the reality of encountering them in person. They were tall and lean, their midnight blue skin marked with intricate patterns of ritual scars. They moved with fluid grace, every gesture precise and economical. Their armor seemed to be grown, rather than manufactured, organic plates that shifted and adjusted to their movements. But it was their eyes that truly unsettled her. Solid silver, without visible pupils, they seemed to look through rather than at everything around them. The lead Shadowkin stepped forward, his scarred hands empty, but never far from the exotic weapons at his side. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly across the battlefield despite the distance. "I am Fleet Commander Zethkiller of the Shadowkin tribes. I would speak with the human commander." Elena looked around at her defenders. Sergeant Williams shook his head vigorously. "Captain, it could be a trap. The Shadowkin are known for their deception in battle." "It could be," Elena agreed. "But they could have just attacked our positions directly if they wanted us dead. And right now, they're the only thing standing between us and complete annihilation." She stood up from behind her barricade, ignoring the protests of her soldiers, and walked out into the open plaza. Every step felt like it might be her last, but she forced herself to maintain a steady pace. Behind her, she could hear Dr. Chen cursing quietly and the sound of weapons being readied. Zethkiller waited motionless as she approached, his silver eyes studying her with an intensity that was both unnerving and strangely respectful. When she stopped 10 feet away from him, he inclined his head slightly in what might have been a bow. "You are the one who commands the human defenders," he said. It was not a question. "Captain Elena Vasquez, commanding officer of New Harmony Colony Defense Force," she replied, matching his formal tone. "You fight well for one with such limited resources," Zethkiller observed. "Your tactical dispositions show wisdom and honor, but you cannot prevail against the Vorthok numbers." Elena nodded grimly. "We know. We're not fighting to win, Commander. We're fighting to make sure our people have a chance." Something flickered in those silver eyes. "Your people. The non-combatants in the underground shelters. Children, elderly, civilians who never signed up for a war," Elena confirmed. "They're depending on us to hold the line." Zethkiller was quiet for a long moment, his gaze shifting to take in the human defensive positions. Elena could see him assessing their placement, their fields of fire, the way they had positioned themselves to protect the shelter entrances rather than to maximize their own survival chances. "In Shadowkin culture," he said finally, "there is a concept called Kethmuller. It translates poorly into your language, but it means the strength to choose death over dishonor. We believed only Shadowkin understood this concept." Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind blowing across the plaza. "What are you saying, Commander?" "I am saying that you and your warriors fight like Shadowkin," Zethkiller replied. "You choose death over abandonment of those you protect. This is unexpected." Before Elena could respond, Zethkiller stepped back and drew something from his belt. It was a weapon unlike anything she had ever seen, a curved blade that seemed to be made of crystallized starlight. The edge hummed with barely contained energy. "Human Commander, I issue challenge," he declared, his voice carrying across the entire battlefield. "Single combat, warrior to warrior. If you prove worthy, The Shadowkin will fight beside you. If you fail, we will depart and leave you to your fate." Alina stared at the alien weapon, her mind racing. She was a good fighter, trained in both armed and unarmed combat, but she was also realistic about her chances against a Shadowkin warrior. They were legendary for their combat skills, with reflexes and strength that bordered on superhuman. But what choice did she have? Without Shadowkin help, the colony would fall within hours. The children in the shelters would become slaves or worse. At least this way, there was a chance. "I accept your challenge," she said, drawing her combat knife. It looked pathetically small compared to Zethkiller's crystalline blade. The Shadowkin commander nodded approvingly. "You may choose weapons." Alina looked at her knife, then at his energy blade, then back at him. "This is fine. I've always preferred fighting on equal terms." To her surprise, Zethkiller smiled. It was a predatory expression, but there was genuine amusement in it. "Human commander, we are never on equal terms. I am stronger, faster, and more experienced than you. This is not a contest of physical capability." Then what is it a contest of? Courage, honor, the willingness to face impossible odds for the sake of others. Zethkiller raised his blade in salute. These are the qualities that make a true warrior. The duel began without ceremony. Zethkiller moved like liquid lightning, his blade tracing arcs of light through the air as he pressed his attack. Alina barely managed to avoid his first strike, the energy weapon passing close enough to her face that she could feel its heat. But as the fight continued, something remarkable happened. Alina began to anticipate his moves, not through superior speed or strength, but through sheer determination and tactical thinking. She used her smaller size to her advantage, staying inside his reach where his longer blade was less effective. She turned the debris of the plaza into obstacles and cover, forcing him to fight on her terms rather than his. Most importantly, she never gave up. Even when his blade scored across her shoulder, sending pain shooting through her arm, she kept fighting. Even when she was bleeding and exhausted, she found ways to press her attack. Zethkiller could have ended the fight at any moment. His blade could have severed her head from her shoulders with casual ease. But he didn't. Instead, he continued to test her, pushing her to her limits and beyond, watching how she responded when all hope seemed lost. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, Alina found an opening. Zethkiller had overextended slightly on a thrust, and she managed to get inside his guard. Her knife pressed against his throat, drawing a thin line of blue blood. For a moment, they stood frozen in that position. Then Zethkiller began to laugh. It was a sound unlike anything Alina had ever heard, deep and rich, and filled with genuine delight. The Shadowkin commander stepped back, lowering his weapon and placing his hand over his heart in what was clearly a gesture of respect. "Worthy," he declared, his voice carrying across the battlefield. "Human warriors, you fight with honor. The Shadowkin will stand with you." What followed was unlike any battle in recorded galactic history. The Shadowkin and humans fought side by side, their different strengths complementing each other perfectly. Where the humans provided tactical knowledge of the terrain and defensive positions, the Shadowkin brought superior firepower and combat skills. Where human technology failed, Shadowkin equipment filled the gaps. The Vorthek, faced with an enemy they had not expected and could not understand, began to make mistakes. Their rigid military doctrine had no provisions for facing a combined force of humans and Shadowkin. Their commanders, trained to fight conventional battles against predictable enemies, found themselves outmaneuvered and outfought at every turn. But the real turning point came when Zethkiller and Alina, fighting back-to-back against a squad of Vorthek shock troops, demonstrated something that would be talked about in military academies for centuries to come. The human commander, bleeding from multiple wounds and nearly exhausted, threw herself between a Shadowkin warrior and a Vorthek energy blast that would have killed him. The Shadowkin, in turn, caught Alina as she fell and carried her to safety while laying down covering fire. It was a moment of trust and sacrifice that transcended species boundaries. The Shadowkin warriors saw it, and they understood. These humans were not clients to be protected or allies to be used. They were warriors, true warriors, who would die for their brothers in arms regardless of what species they belonged to. The battle for New Harmony Colony ended 3 hours later with the complete withdrawal of Vorthek forces. Commander Vorthnax, faced with mounting casualties and an enemy that refused to behave according to established military doctrine, chose discretion over valor and ordered a full retreat. As the last Vorthak ships disappeared into hyperspace, Elena stood beside Zethkiller on the colony's observation deck, watching the stars return to their peaceful configurations. Her arm was in a sling, and she had bandages covering various cuts and burns, but she was alive. More importantly, so were her people. "Your warriors fought well," Zethkiller said, his silver eyes reflecting the starlight. "Many of my own people could learn from their example." Elena nodded, still hardly believing what had happened. "Why did you help us, Commander? Really? Your people had nothing to gain from this fight." Zethkiller was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer. "In the old stories of my people, there is a legend about the first Shadowkin warriors. They were not born strong or fast or skilled in battle. They became warriors because they chose to stand against the darkness, even when they knew they could not win." He turned to look at her directly. "Today we met the first humans who reminded us of those ancient heroes. Perhaps that is reason enough."